Are you single, dating, engaged, maybe you're even married? Welcome to the month of love.
This is the FYI podcast. We're your hosts, Josiah and Micah Kennealy. We're in a series the whole month of February called Love, Sex, Dating, and Waiting. These episodes in this series are presented by our partners at Covenant Eyes. If you want to experience freedom from the shame and the chains of pornography, Covenant Eyes is an accountability software that is so amazing. You can get your first month free with promo code Young Adults, YOUNG ADULTS, no spaces, Young Adults at covenanteyes.com, or use the link in the show notes.
Yeah, and if you want to take your singleness, dating, engagement to the next level and bring Christ back into the center, you have an opportunity to check out micahkennealy.com, where you can get your very first leather-bound journal, which is specifically designed to help you center your life around Christ in your singleness, dating, engagement, and even your marriage. For your friends who are wondering how you're doing it, you get to journal to your future spouse and gift this to them on your wedding night, where you get to pray, journal, read scripture, and learn how to fast for your future spouse.
It's amazing. Again, micahkennealy.com while supplies
$10 off, you guys.
And here's our newest conversation on the FYI podcast. Today's episode of FYI podcast, we're going to have some fun. We are unpacking Grace's question. Grace sent in the DM on Instagram and said, she goes, talk about boundaries in dating. I thought that was such a great question. And we've done an episode talking about freedom in Christ. We're talking with Kristen Ostrom about singleness. We're going to talk with Sam and Madison later in this series about marriage and saying I do. But I think that bringing dating into the conversation in this series on love, sex, dating, and waiting, talking about boundaries, I love it. Yeah. Babe, you want to go with today's verse of the day?
All right, everybody. Today's verse of the day comes from Proverbs 27:12, and it says, "The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty."
Unpack that, babe.
Unpack that. I would even say the first part, prudent, see danger and take refuge, meaning that you are wise, you see something, you take refuge, you get out of the way of it, and you avoid whatever that is, fill in the blank. And the simple keep going and pay the penalty, meaning they're simple-minded. They don't think about the future. They don't think about the consequences. They don't think about others or who and how the decisions that they are participating in or making are impacting not only themselves, but those around them. So I think even just understanding that start doing something that your future self is going to thank you for. So I think when you are wise versus simple, you are preparing, you're planning, you're thinking, you're aware. There's an awareness factor. So that's what I would say. Is there anything that I missed that you would want to add to that? Unpacking it?
I don't think you missed anything. I think my perspective on the Proverbs is just, this is the book of wisdom.
Right.
This was written to young adults. Really, King Solomon wrote many of the Proverbs, and he was considered, up until Jesus, the wisest person who had ever walked the face of this planet. And for us to get good at asking questions, to get good at listening, to get good at seeking wisdom. James, which is kind of considered the New Testament Proverbs, the half-brother of Jesus, wrote that one. And along the same lines, he says, ask God for wisdom. So you might be in your 20s or in your 30s as a young adult and like, God, I need wisdom in relationships. I need wisdom in dating. I need wisdom with my career. I need wisdom with decision-making. Look, the crossroads of young adulthood is rush hour traffic.
Oh, for sure. Like, you're just praying not to get ran over.
Like, we live here near Minneapolis, and right by the airport, right by Mall of America. Hit us up if you ever are in town. We'd love to see you. But I think that what's crazy is one of the busiest intersections in our state, in the entire country, is 494 and 35W. You can get to Minneapolis easy. You can get south of the river like Lakeville. You can get out west like Lake Minnetonka. You can go east to like St. Paul, the other Twin City. But I think that everyone wants to go on these roads, and Jesus said it, that narrow is the path that leads to life. And so it's finding that wisdom that's going to bless us for a lifetime to come and echo into eternity. And I thought we'd do something fun.
Oh, okay. Before we answer the question,
Yeah, legit. Like right here, we were given these conversation starters as a Christmas gift, I think it was.
Yes,
by a
88
family member.
conversation starts.
Yep.
88 great.
And
conversation
so
starters.
we are gonna each read one.
Okay.
So I'm gonna read one to you, babe.
Okay, and I'm gonna
And
answer
you're
it.
gonna answer it.
Okay.
And then I don't know the question that's coming to me. So here,
Okay.
you ready
I'm
for
ready.
it?
Yes.
Drum roll.
What do you got?
Bring it.
Bring
Okay.
it. Okay.
In what ways are we alike? How are we different?
Oh,
and
man.
do you think that opposites attract?
Ooh, okay.
And this is 3 rapid fire questions.
Okay. Do I think opposites attract? I'm gonna start at the end. Do I think opposites attract? Yes and no. And I'll get to that. So I think our curiosity is piqued due to the opposite attracting.
Sure.
Because we are not wired the same. So I think that initially attracts. But we are separate people even in the process. So yes and no. Are we different? Yes. I would
Meaning
say
Josiah and Micah.
yes.
Okay.
Are we different? Yes. I would say even in the form of introvert, extrovert.
Okay. Who's the introvert?
Me.
Yep.
And you, I'm an omnivert. I
Okay.
mean, I can kind of swing both ways, but you're definitely extrovert.
Yep.
So I just think just those like, who's a spender, who's a saver? I can spend, you can save, like, and granted we meet in the middle. So I think those are the types of things where we learn how to balance each other out.
And even Carrie Newhoff, one of our favorite leaders,
Yeah.
he was a guest on the Young Adults Today podcast. He was fascinated by us. He wrote a book called At Your Best.
Yeah.
And his whole thing, he goes, you guys should really do a podcast on marriage because at your best, when are you at your best?
Oh, from like 7 to 11 a.m. That's probably my best, most productive.
When am I at my best?
Not that 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. I don't know, somewhere.
Do we need a time change in this marriage?
We need a time change. If we did shift work, it would be great in some awesome ways, but that's not even feasible.
And we're recording this at what time?
I don't even know what time is it. 12:47
on a Wednesday.
On a Wednesday,
so
mid-afternoon. So 2 o'clock's my nap time. I feel like I need a second cup of coffee. Anyway, but are we the same? I think we're not the same people, but we have similar callings in life where elements of your life will align. So we're both called to young adults. We both feel called to speak and to teach and to preach and to write and to encourage those around us. But we're also very different, even in our approaches of how we do that. So do opposites attract? On some levels, I would say yes. That doesn't mean you go out and find some bad boy. Why find something so extremely opposite of you? But I would say the other thing is, Pastor Jerry Strankus would say, like, if two of you, if you keep saying like, oh, we're like the same person, this is awesome, like I found my soulmate. Okay, he would say, which I would agree with, if you are the same person, if you two are the same person, then one of you is unnecessary.
Love that word. How
boring would it be for blah to meet blah? Like, let's just be blah together. Where I'm spicy, Josiah's a little more neutral. Where he's wound up, I'm a little more tame. So it's fun to bring out that and balance each other out. So I don't know. That's a lot. You asked me 3 questions.
Oh my gosh. And Greg Laurie, great pastor and author, pastors a church called Harvest in Riverside, California. He describes when he met Lonnie Frisbee, a friend of his, they did ministry together. Yeah. It was like nitro meeting glycerin. And I think for the person who does desire marriage, we always say like, finding a spouse doesn't fix you. Your relationship status isn't a problem to be solved.
Right.
And finding a spouse doesn't like complete you, but it sure complements you.
Right.
And I view it as like, it's like when nitro meets glycerin, and that's when you have like a chemical reaction where it's just like
even like biblically, iron sharpens iron.
Yes.
There's 2 solid, strong people sharpening each other in the process of marriage and discovering each other more and more. Okay.
Love these conversation starters.
Josiah's question. Let's see here. What first attracted you to me, and when did you know that I was the one?
Ooh, that's fun.
When did you know that I was?
You like just proved it. It's card number 34, 24.
24.
So,
Dr. Seuss says a little quote. You know you're in love when you can't fall asleep because reality is finally better than your dreams. Oh, Dr. Seuss. I didn't know that one. Anyway, sorry. You can answer it.
So what first attracted me to you?
Yeah.
What was it about you that I was attracted to? You know, our story is we met at Cedar Valley Church, Bloomington, Minnesota. I was on staff leading young adults. You walked in and I had actually already heard about you. A few mutual friends, Nate Chapman, Terry Parkman, they had given Micah Mack and I, who were on staff together, they had given us a heads up. Hey, there's this gal who moved from Bismarck, North Dakota to go back to North Central. She's looking for a church where there's a young adult ministry to lead in.
Yeah.
And so I had heard about your name. And then I remember we met in the lobby, and I had a rule. I don't date people from this church because I'm your pastor, really.
Right.
And so it wasn't the church's rule, it was my rule.
Which I think was a wise rule.
And I really leaned into that rule of my own. But I would say it was when first I was attracted to you. Number one, you're beautiful. The second thing, though, is when we had become friends. Like we had developed, I don't know, 6 months, maybe 8 or 10 months where we were friends. We did ministry together. We saw each other 4 or 5 times in a lot of weeks, hanging out in a lot of the same groups.
Yeah.
And then what ended up happening is we went on a missions trip that I led to China. And I saw your heart. And I got back and went to a day trip to Chicago with Micah Mack, another dear friend. And the whole U2 concert, like Bono's up there and he's singing like, in the name of love. And it wasn't even the month of February. It wasn't even like the relationship series.
It was like in May.
It was just like he's singing the songs where the streets have no name. I should have been on key there, but there I did the voice clear, you know where you go. But la la la, tip of the tongue, the teeth, the lips. So I was in Chicago U2 concert, and I couldn't stop thinking about you. And so that's when I think I sent the text, and I was like thinking to myself, this could be awkward. She might want to go to another church. Our friendship might be over, but I would regret the rest of my life if I didn't share how I felt.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that that's when did I know that you were the one, though? Is, I had some fears. I had some things that I had to walk through, and we actually broke up. We put a pause on things that we didn't think it was a pause. We said it was the end. But during that time, that was when I saw what my life would look like without you. And that's when I was like, I need to get over some fears. I need to heal from God and just different things.
Yeah.
But that's when I knew that you were the one.
December of 2015.
Yep.
Oh man, it sounds like a long time ago already. Good answers, everybody.
And we're gonna unpack like what are boundaries, talking about boundaries in dating, establishing boundaries. And I think there's something that you really have that you've taught on before that I think is, in this day and age, just essential. Can you unpack where's your headspace at, Micah, with like boundaries?
Well, I think you should, even if you are not yet in a relationship and you are interested in somebody and they're interested in you, I think even having boundary conversations and expectations before you even put a label on dating, I think is smart. But if you find yourself in a relationship and you have not yet had the boundaries conversation, it's not too late to start infiltrating those elements of who you are and your morals and your goals and just where you're at and where you don't want to be. I think are good. And I think I land on 3 things just because I know, and it may sound so elementary, and I will tell you this, that I implemented these in my life while dating Josiah at the age of 27. So if you're like, oh my gosh, it sounds like I'm 15 again, my mom and dad. Hey, I felt the same way when I felt God laid these rules down in my heart, because if you give the enemy an inch in any of these areas of boundary, he will take a mile every time, and you cannot take back time and you cannot take back your mistakes. Now you can reprocess and you can reel it in and you can establish new boundaries. But once you've flown off the guardrail with purity and you've gone all the way, like you can't jump back onto the cliff if you've already jumped off, right? And even if you have that ripcord and whatever, there's still consequences for those decisions. And I'm not heaping guilt or shame. I'm just saying, once you've gone too far, it's hard to reel it back in and start at ground zero without that constant temptation to go where you've once been. right? Or you feel like you park in the lane of shame. Like
Mhm.
there is freedom, there is redemption, there is rededication of your life, your purity relationship with Jesus and making him your everything and bringing Christ back into the center. So when I talk about these three things, I talk about if you're in a relationship with boundaries, number one is time. How much time are you spending with that person? How
Mhm.
much time are you spending with your friends? If they are all consuming and they're the only thing in your life and you've been idolizing them, or they become number one and the head of your relationship with God, that becomes a problem. And then with time, I actually had I had a rule, like I would not text you, even if you texted me past 10 p.m. Remember, he's a night owl. So
Mhm.
he's like out at Applebee's, he's hanging out with friends, he's at a game, whatever. And I wouldn't answer some of the texts because I'm like, it's not he was saying anything appropriate. It's like I become more vulnerable past 10 p.m. verbally.
Mhm.
I know that I do. I still do in marriage. So I had time of like, what am I going to respond to you to set up
Mhm.
those time boundaries? You were out of my apartment by
Mhm.
10 p.m. or we were out in public with other people if it was past that curfew that I had placed on myself and shared with you in that process. So time I think is essential. Touch I think is setting up those boundaries of holding hands and snuggling and spooning. And I think Terry Parkman says it best, just like what has he said?
I think he said something to the effect of, you don't want to wait until you're making out in the back seat of the car to decide and determine what your boundaries are.
Yeah. And I think that's an example of a physical boundary.
And so boundaries are pre-decisions.
Yes, they are. They are. So it's time, touch.
Mhm.
I think just being mindful of your hands. And if you can delay as much as you can, delay that
Mhm.
on all fronts,
Mhm.
kissing, making out, all that
Mhm.
kind of stuff. And you might be like, Mike, you're so old school. Listen, like I said, you play with fire, like if you people always ask, Micah, how close can I get? Well, how close can you get to sin without sinning? Like that's the wrong question. It's saying, what boundaries does God have set up in the word of God that are there to protect me, not deprive me?
Mhm.
So
And it is an old book that promises a new life.
truly, it so does on so many fronts. So time, touch, and I would say technology is one thing. What are you sending each other? How are you talking? How are you Zooming, TikToking? What's the other one? Snapchatting, like
Oh
just
my
those
gosh, what
things.
media are you
Right.
consuming?
But consuming for yourself, but also what are you sending to each
Mhm.
other?
Mhm.
So I mean, putting up those guardrails or time, touch, and technology, I think are
Love it.
essential. And if one of you, I would say this, if one of you has expectations like way up here, and one of you is like, well, this is okay right here, the person down here always rises to the occasion of the other. And if you're both here, then you both need to raise your bar.
Mhm.
And you both have to start having accountability people that you're scared to check in with and say, hey, are you guarding her heart? Hey, are
Mhm.
you staying over at night? Hey, what is your curfew? Hey,
Mhm.
someone who's
Mhm.
asking you the hard questions in that process of time, touch, and technology, I think can be very helpful or detrimental if you do or do not have in place. So, what would you say?
I think that boundaries are like this in relationships. Everything we do is practice for the future.
Yeah.
And so I think that we get it mixed up sometimes where, the message is like, wait for marriage, wait for marriage, wait for marriage. Yes. And I believe what scripture outlines is that sex is for holy matrimony.
Yeah.
Like that is so crystal clear. And I think at the same time, my hypothesis is I've asked God, like, why is it that you are asking us, young adults, why is it that this is the call for obedience in relationships?
Mhm.
And you know what I've sensed is this: boundaries are a practice for marriage. All
Mhm.
boundaries are practice for the future. And it's like we're always forming habits.
Mhm.
And so the boundary that you're practicing, if you're sleeping around as a single person or dating, is that's practice for infidelity in marriage.
100%. Yeah.
And if you're practicing fidelity, even in a dating relationship, even though you are engaged, even though you think that this is gonna, even though you love each other and you're Christians and that God is at the center of this, even though you think that there might be wedding bells coming, fidelity in dating, waiting for marriage, is actually practiced for fidelity in marriage. Because I think a myth that a lot of people believe, a couple could be, is one, that I think a lot of people are hung up in believing a myth or a lie that, okay, they just view pornography, they're not disciplined, they're not getting accountability software, because they're like, oh, once I get married, my sex drive and my needs will be taken care of.
Right.
And so it'll solve all those problems. And we know from data and research and just talking to married, you might be single today desiring to be married. We also talk to a lot of people who are married who desire to be single. So why are there fewer marriages? Why are marriages not lasting? And why are so many marriages unhappy? I think that that's a factor. And I think the other myth that we believe, or the lie that we believe, is that, you know, we're some sort of exception to the rule.
Right. And I think as humans, we try to justify any and all behavior.
Oh my gosh.
Right. So how long can I play with fire before I get burned is a question. Essentially what you're saying, but it's like, oh, I don't want to reap the consequences. Well, don't camp on enemy lines. Like, don't let the enemy in.
We've all been to a campfire and a bonfire where somebody has this great idea, and they pick up the like a stick or the poker, and they like flip it up, and they take one of the hot coals and they toss it to somebody, and then they play like hot potato with a coal.
I've never done that.
You've never done that? Okay. I don't think I'm the only one, but this is exactly what you're describing. Like, somebody that I was at a bonfire with, it might have been me, had this idea, like, hey, think quick. Let's play this. And then let's toss it back and forth. And you don't get burned right away. But if you hold it a second too long, millisecond too long, like, all you can do with this hot coal thing, that's a true story. It's you can catch and release, like, whoosh, and if you are fast enough, you don't get burnt. But it goes back to the simple, see danger, and they keep going. They suffer the consequences. They get burned. They don't pay attention to the caution signs. They don't pay attention to the guardrails. And what they end up doing is they pay the consequences later. Whereas the prudent, the wise person seek danger and they take refuge. I remember being 16 years old, first winter in Minnesota driving. And I was coming back from a final at school, and I spun out going over the 35W bridge. Lost control of the vehicle. Thankfully, I was the only vehicle involved. And I watched as in the cup holder, I had one cup holder filled with like coins. And then the other was like pens, pencils. And I watched all of them just like slow motion go everywhere. The car was just spinning. I was on black ice, didn't see it. And black ice is this thing, if you're not from the Midwest or in Minnesota, where it hits like 32 degrees and then the ground freezes and it looks like normal cement or blacktop, looks clear. But if you get caught on it, it will spin you right out of control, especially if you're going too fast or on cruise control or something like that. Well, I spun out. And I thought it was the end, because over me is the Minnesota River.
Once you fall off that in a car in the middle of winter.
And I promise you, what saved my life that day was there was a boundary. There was a guardrail over the Minnesota River on 35W. We live not far from it now. And that is the whole, the prudent see danger and take refuge, the simple keep going and pay the penalty. And it's like, guardrails are not sexy on the streets. Like, boundaries are not like this exhilarating thing. They don't put butterflies in your stomach. And yet this is, I think, one of the wisest things that we can do in having boundaries. And so it could be chapter and verse, like we were just in. What are good boundaries for a healthy Christian New Testament relationship? Because we don't see dating in scripture. In the Bible times, it was more arranged marriages. So dating is a little bit more of a relatively new concept.
And I would even say for the person listening, like, oh my gosh, I just cringe at the thought of a boundary. I used to be a personal trainer and fitness instructor. Anybody that I would ever meet with, and we knew that their dietary supplementing of junk food needed to change if they wanted results, right? So what I would even tell them is, okay, we're not going to focus on what you can't eat or you shouldn't eat or that you should avoid. We're going to focus on the things that are healthy for you, that you should consume and that you should eat in moderation. And then these things you should eat like in your daily regimens. So when you flip the script of like, I mean, it's like getting told to the doctor, you're going to the doctor's office and they tell you can't eat gluten. Okay, that was my story. You can't eat gluten anymore.
Yeah.
What? I can't have pizza. I can't have breadsticks. I can't have pasta. I can't have I went through this whole list of things that I can't eat. And I was so frustrated. This was like 10, 15 years ago. So it's obviously evolved since then. But in that moment, I felt so defeated. I felt so frustrated because it's like, okay, if I can't eat all these things, what can I eat? And I think for the person who's like, if I've gone all the way and I've given everything away, and you're telling me I shouldn't do these things anymore, and it's biblically saying that I should save myself sexually for marriage. It's a covenant between a man and a wife in the context of marriage, and that covenant happens on the wedding night. What do I do? I would say if you need to rededicate yourself to the Lord, your purity, and start praying, forgiving yourself, forgiving the people who maybe wronged you or something that's been taken from you, offer forgiveness to yourself. Ask God for forgiveness. Forgive anybody else involved and start looking at what can I do? Okay, I'm dating this person. I can pursue them. I can take them out on dates. We can have amazing conversation. We can take walks. We can go mini golfing. We can go bowling. Like all the activities that you can do to get to know somebody that you could potentially spend the rest of your life with. Listen, there's going to be conversations that you have that you should have in your dating process and not wait for marriage. And what better way to do that than to know what can I do, not what do I want to do. And I would say for the person who does have the desire for marriage, who does have the desire for intimacy with a spouse someday, who does have a high drive and has these expectations of the future, what they can and should look like, because this is what Hollywood's portrayed it as, this is how fun it should be. I would start praying if you're struggling with the boundaries that you've set up and the parameters. Number one, before any date or anybody that you meet of the opposite sex, I would say, I'm going to invite God into this situation and this relationship. Whether or not they know about it is one thing, but if they're a believer, Josiah and I would literally pray before every day. Okay, Lord, we want to honor and glorify you with our words, with our actions. We don't have to say our bodies. You can say actions.
With how we spend our time.
And how we spend our time together, maybe honoring and pleasing to you. And when you invite God into that date night, it just can change the outcome of the evening potentially, right? So with that, I would even say that that's one approach. Two, I would say, Lord, will you tame this desire in my heart for marriage and intimacy today? Now, I'm not asking God to remove any and all sexual desires from here on out. It's saying, Lord, tame this desire in my heart, and I trust that you are going to fulfill it. Because in 1 Thessalonians 5:24, it says, if he said it, he will do it. Now, does that mean in our time? No, that means God's time. And with our time comes two things: free will and obedience. Even when it doesn't make sense, be obedient. There's an immediate obedient factor that needs to help it happen in your dating life. If God says, no, do not go on this date, and you do not feel peace with this person pursuing you, do not text them back. Just say, no, thank you. Be strong, be firm, delete their number. Don't go on that date. That's God guiding you. There's an immediate obedience. If you feel peace and you didn't have to convince yourself to go on this date, then maybe it could be from the Lord, and you can put yourself out there in that dating pool. And I would say with free will, we all have free will. We don't have a God that controls us. We have a God that guides us, but that doesn't always mean that we stay on the guided path. So when we go off on our own adventure and we find ourselves in the middle of nowhere wondering how we got there, there's consequences for the free will that we get to tell the story later. Right? To our future spouse, to the person we're dating, maybe even to ourselves. So I would say those are a couple things to keep in mind. Lord, tame this desire in my heart, because he will come in and tame that desire. It doesn't mean that he kills that desire and says, you're no good for marriage if that's something that's already there. It's saying, let me tame that, meaning that I'm not going to act out in my flesh. I'm going to team up with God and the Holy Spirit. So once we can start doing that and submitting those requests to the Lord and coming to him with all of those feelings, emotions, desires, you should hopefully sleep better, breathe better, know that there's nothing wrong with you if you're single. There's nothing wrong with you if you're married. I'm just saying, we would much rather see young adults work for a marriage that is good and godly than to settle for something along the way that becomes hell on earth later. So even in the realm of, we talk about there's 4 different levels of desired relationship,
For sure.
essentially.
For sure.
Decide, you want to break those down, start at the bottom and work our way up. Because I've experienced probably 3 of the 4.
Mhm.
3 of the 4? Okay.
Mhm.
Or
Yeah.
start at the top, whatever way.
Yeah.
So it's 4 levels.
Yeah. The levels of relationship that we've kind of adopted and made our own, it's like discontent in marriage, and you never want to get there.
Right.
So if somebody says like, I'm not happy in this marriage, that's like, oh man,
I married the
what
wrong
happened?
person.
Yep.
What are we
Yep.
doing? Yeah.
And that's why singleness is so important, and dating is so
Yeah.
important, and who you choose to marry, should you choose to get married, it's why we need wisdom. It's why we
Yeah.
pray. It's why a worth the wait journal is
Yeah.
such a great spiritual discipline. And so you don't want to reach a place where you're discontent in marriage. Now, there's a lot of people who become discontent in their singleness.
Mhm.
I even ran a poll on my Instagram story, like, are you content or discontent? Are you single, dating, engaged? Where are you at with relationships? And
Mhm.
but if you are unhappily single, the only place you can go is down.
Mhm.
If you get married, that's not going to solve your happiness.
Yeah.
Your happiness or your joy or your contentment isn't found in your relationship status changing. It's single people problems that we got to deal with and address and do the work that's involved. Yes, while we're single. Yes.
Yeah.
And don't you want that for your future spouse to say like,
Yeah.
hey, I became the best version of myself with God's help.
Yeah.
And
before I met you.
exactly. Or even while I'm meeting you.
Right.
And then where you want to be is content in singleness. You're happily single. You're like, it doesn't mean you don't want to get married or that that's not a desire, but you're like, look, I'm happy and I'm content. And if God elevates me, awesome. Your time will come. And then the goal, the desire for all of us is to be content in marriage and content, happily married. And that's just something that's so powerful, and that we've seen it all, and I think that I just wanted to break down that kind of quadrants of relationships.
No, you're good. Yeah, so I think it's good just keeping in mind wherever you find yourself on that, start praying that God would start healing any hurts, hurdles, and hangups that you personally have now, because those are things that need healing before you get married. And if you get married in 2 extremely messy, broken, hurt people coming together, you're only going to be even more frustrated and discouraged and annoyed because you didn't let God heal you in the singleness. You expected that other person to heal your problems and heal your heart and say, here's my broken heart, here's my brokenness, fix me. And that's nothing. That's only God can fix us. And it's not even fixing. Only God can mend the brokenness of us.
Redeeming, restoring.
Yes.
And I think of some of my friends in their marriage for their first year of marriage, and it turned into, I think, their first 7 years of marriage. Some of my mentors, they and we didn't do this necessarily, but they decided in their marriage to start with a boundary, and they did not own a television. A few people found out, word on the street got out. They were offered and given like several TVs. Like people were like, I feel bad for you. They thought they were like really poor or something. Like, do you want one of our TVs that doesn't work so hot, but we got a new one? Like, nothing wrong with this one, but we just got something bigger or thinner. And my friends, they started, and the reason they created that boundary is it's so easy to just like veg out, which that whole expression, it's like what? Vegetable out on the couch, like turn into a vegetative sedated state and be entertained. And I'm not against entertainment or media or sports or even Hollywood, cinema, films.
But it increases the opportunity for conversation, for reading, for eye-to-eye, like eye-to-eye, like intimacy. Like it's not one eye looking over here, one eye over here. It's I'm fully engaged with you. Yeah.
And their whole goal with that was to start their marriage with a foundation and build the foundation years of their marriage without television. And I believe this family now, they own some form of a TV, but I think that that's just like what an amazing thing. And I think something that JP says, I've heard Jonathan Pokluda talk about this, and it might be in his book Outdated as well. Like if you just do the math on for once you get married and why it's important to establish rhythms of communication and boundaries and get good at why did we do the questions? We wanted to show you that Micah and I are still growing in communication, becoming better interviewers or question askers. We're becoming better listeners and tracking and all of those things. But back to what JP says, like if you get married and you are having sex and having that form of intimacy, it's not how you spend all of your time or even most of your time. It's like, so his wording is like, you better get good at other things like listening or asking questions and having conversations and have there be more to your relationship than physical.
Well, there needs to be substance and depth. And I think so many times we go straight towards the physical ramifications, or like those are the ramifications that we kind of, I don't know, reap the consequences of. But it's like, okay, but there's also substance. There's intimacy through conversation, not through physical elements. And I think if you can become a good conversationalist in your singleness, you'll just become a better communicator in your marriage. So it's like establishing expectations for yourself versus the other person that you're looking for, I think is smart.
And I mean, my last thought,
Go ahead.
and then I'd love to hear any last thoughts that you have on boundaries in dating. But one of the things that I think needs to be elevated in this conversation is once you're married, what are the boundaries that you have?
Yeah, that's good.
Because again, it's back to the myths that I was talking about, or about the lies. Like the thing is so many married people cheat on each other. Yeah. So many married people, there's infidelity. And this is why many marriages don't last. And yet it was like nobody set out to like have an affair when they were reading their vows. And yet, were there the boundaries? Was there the framework for a healthy covenant in marriage? And that's why I think that like maybe even a better question is like, what are the boundaries in marriage? Because I think that that's a great place to start practicing those boundaries now, whether it's time or technology or touch or other things. It could be travel. It could be so many different things of just like in marriage. And so that's one of the things that I'm passionate about. And I just wanted to share that. Any last thoughts, babe, when it comes to just answering Grace's question about boundaries in dating?
Boundaries in dating. Well, I think when you're dating, you have to also look forward to like, what do you want your marriage to look like? Because dating's fun, it's exciting, it's all these different things. And I feel like God downloaded this at Bible study last night. So I have this diagram, and it's like, it's arrows, and it's both of you. If this is when you do get married. So if you didn't have any of these conversations and you're find yourself in marriage, there's choices that Josiah makes, that I make, and that we make. So there's a he, a she, and a we. And
it's almost like the Venn diagram.
Sure. I don't know who that is, but
it's the three circles where there's he, she, we. We is the overlap.
Oh, see, he's smarter than I am. And I just sketched this out. So I feel like this first one right here, it's two arrows that are growing apart. So it's two people in a household that are like just doing their thing, and they don't have any conversation. This generally leads to divorce. And then you have the, excuse me, the people, the second one would be two arrows essentially going in the same direction side by side. Now that turns into, you're just cohabitating, you're just coexisting, you're just going through the motions. You don't really, maybe you don't have sex anymore and you have kids, and the kids become your world, or your business thing, my business thing. And we're just occupying a household. Roommates. Yes, we're just roommates. So it's occupying this household. We don't really know what's going on in each other's lives. We're not really engaging.
It's like the people who they're like, I said I love you on the day we got married.
Do I have to tell you every day?
Right. Yeah.
The answer, yes, you should tell each other every day. And then I feel like there's this third one, when you're both two Christians taking your life seriously with the Lord. You're serious about your walk with Jesus. You are as well. You're not just roommates. You are a married couple doing life together, and you grow closer together with the Lord spearheading everything you do, where you can become an unstoppable force for God's kingdom, which does not lead to divorce, which does not lead to infidelity, which does not lead to pornography addictions, does not lead to any secret sin, because you're living in cadence with Christ and you're living so close to each other that you probably know what I'm going to say before I say it. And we're seeking God together and separately, and we become stronger together. So it's like, even looking at this diagram, thinking, if you are married listening, you're like, where is my marriage now? Where has it been? And where do I want it to be? I think those are some things that you need to ask yourself. But how we set up our boundaries in dating, our expectations in dating, our singleness affects our married life, whether you want to realize it or not. Start praying. What kind of marriage do you want? Do you want one that begins with the end in mind, which is the last diagram that I showed you, where we're elevating Christ and living together? Do you just want to become roommates? Well, get a dog. I'm sorry, like that's not going to be very fulfilling for anybody. Or maybe you have experienced divorce, you come from a divorced family, and you can see where things kind of shifted in your household. So just start praying for your future marriage. And I'd say that's a personal boundary that you need to establish.
It's good.
What is my boundary with the Lord? What are my expectations? And to share your heart openly before the Lord. There's nothing that you can say that's going to surprise him. There's nothing you can say that he can't handle. So
I love
that's
that.
my last thought.
Thanks for sharing that. It's a little bit of a hot take or spicy, segment here on the FYI podcast, what I'm about to say, but like, I think that I wonder sometimes is that if so many marriages are unhappy or unsuccessful because their baseline was they settled and they just wanted to get married. So they got married and they never had a vision for what you're describing of more than a marriage, which is a growing marriage, which is a growing closer, which is a unlimited PhD in a degree of each other, because we're going to study each other. We're going to research. It's your own case study, in like becoming an expert in Micah is one of the assignments I think God's given me as an opportunity.
And I still surprise you with random things.
For sure. For sure. But I wonder that sometimes if we need a bigger vision of who God is, about his meaning of marriage, what his purpose and and it comes from his word. And so loving this series, excited for the next couple of weeks. We've got Kristen Ostrom will be joining. We'll be talking about singleness. We're going to talk with friends Sam and Madison about I Do. And if you have questions about relationships, or maybe it's for future series about adulting, life, faith, theology, the future, career, calling, so much more, check out youngadults.today and the show notes for here. You're listening to the FYI podcast.